Before the events of November unfolded, you need to understand the environment of Vanguard Analytics. Vanguard was a behemoth in the data processing sector, processing trillions of data points for Fortune 500 companies. It was a company built on the brutal, unrelenting extraction of value from data and, by extension, from its employees. I had joined Vanguard 22 years ago when it was a scrappy startup operating out of a leased warehouse in San Jose. My name is Donovan Miller. I am 58 years old, and my life has been defined by structures, logic, and undeniable proofs. I don't deal in corporate politics. I deal in data. I wired the first server racks myself. I wrote the foundational bash scripts that automated their initial database backups. I watched the company grow from a 20-person operation into a global entity with offices in London, Tokyo, and New York. As the company grew, the culture shifted. The engineers who built the company were slowly pushed to the basement, replaced in the executive suites by MBAs who spoke in buzzwords and measured success purely by quarterly profit margins. Elena Rostova was the embodiment of this new vanguard. She had a degree from Wharton, a ruthless ambition, and an absolute contempt for the engineering staff. She was 42 years old, the director of client strategy, and she viewed us not as creators, but as raw materials to be mined. My relationship with Elena had been adversarial from her first day. She consistently attempted to overpromise capabilities to clients, assuming the engineering team could magically bend the laws of physics and computational limits to meet her arbitrary deadlines. I was the one who pushed back. I was the one who cited server loads, processing times, and algorithmic limitations. To her, I was an obstacle, an old, stubborn relic of Vanguard's past who stood in the way of her upward trajectory. This animosity was the bedrock upon which her catastrophic plan was built. She didn't just want to steal the Oracle protocol. She wanted to break me in the process. She wanted to demonstrate to the entire company that the old guard was powerless against the new regime. Her fatal flaw was arrogance. She believed that power in a corporation comes from titles, from corner offices, and from the ability to intimidate HR into compliance. She fundamentally misunderstood the nature of power in the 21st century. True power doesn't reside in a title, it resides in the root access. It resides in the encrypted logs, the database schemas, and the immutable audit trails. When you control the architecture, you control the reality of the corporation. I had built the reality of Vanguard Analytics. She was just a temporary resident living in a structure I designed. And when she tried to evict me, I simply changed the locks and initiated a demolition protocol. The fluorescent lights of the 34th floor always hummed at exactly 60 hertz, a sound I had tuned out over my 22 years as a systems architect. But on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-November, data and politics collided in a spectacular fashion. The incident happened publicly, deliberately designed to humiliate me. The open plan office was bustling when Elena strode in, flanked by two HR representatives. She didn't ask me into an office. She stopped right at my desk, her voice carrying across the silent room. "Donovan, we're terminating your employment at Vanguard Analytics, effective immediately," she announced. The tapping of keyboards abruptly stopped. 60 heads turned in our direction. "Your recent performance has been misaligned with our strategic goals, and it has come to my attention that you've been working on unauthorized projects on company time." I stared at her, my hands still hovering over my mechanical keyboard. "Allied projects? I built the predictive modeling algorithm on my own time, on my own equipment, and it's not Vanguard property." Elena smiled, a thin, predatory expression. "Actually, Donovan, the IP assignment agreement you signed last month clearly states that any algorithm developed during your tenure belonged to the company. HR has the paperwork. Security will escort you out. I knew I hadn't signed any such agreement. I am meticulous with paperwork." The sheer audacity of her lie left me temporarily speechless. I was marched out of the building I had helped build from a technological standpoint, holding a cardboard box containing a mug, a framed photo of my late wife, and 22 years of misplaced loyalty. But Elena had made a critical miscalculation. She assumed I was just a tired old man who would slink away into early retirement. She didn't realize that a systems architect understands how to find every hidden trace, every digital fingerprint, and every fatal flaw in a system. I went home, brewed a pot of black coffee, and began to dismantle her lie. To understand the sheer magnitude of the Oracle protocol, one must understand the evolution of predictive modeling. For years, the industry relied on linear regression models and basic time series forecasting. They were adequate, but they were fragile. A single black swan event, a pandemic, a blocked canal, a sudden tariff, would shatter the models and leave companies scrambling. I designed the Oracle protocol to be anti-fragile. It wasn't just reacting to data, it was synthesizing it. The architecture involved a hybrid convolutional neural network, CNN, combined with LSTM, long short-term memory units. The CNN layers extracted spatial features from global heat maps of shipping lanes and factory outputs, while the LSTM layers analyzed sequential temporal dependencies. In simpler terms, it watched the world breathe. It monitored the pulse of global commerce. I trained it on petabytes of historical data spanning 40 years. I wrote custom data scrapers that pulled real-time information from global port authorities, satellite imagery APIs tracking cargo ship drafts, and natural language processing modules that analyze the sentiment of political speeches in emerging markets. Every single line of this architecture was written on my personal machine, a heavily modified Linux rig I built from scratch, utilizing dual RTX 3090 GPUs for the model training. I paid for the electricity, I paid for the API keys. Vanguard Analytics contributed absolutely nothing to its creation. The problem with stealing from an architect is that we design the security systems. We know the logs, we know the audit trails. Before I was fully locked out of my corporate account, I had initiated a silent script, a dead man's switch I had programmed years ago in case of a server catastrophe. It mirrored my local directory and sent the encrypted logs to a secure off-site server. I had the logs. Now I needed the proof of her forgery. I contacted an old friend who still worked in Vanguard's legal department, leveraging 20 years of favors to get a digitized copy of the supposed IP assignment agreement Elena claimed I had signed. When the PDF arrived in my encrypted inbox, I opened it and zoomed in on the signature line. It was my signature, certainly, but it was too perfect. The days following my termination were a blur of caffeine and code. I didn't sleep. The perceived betrayal by the company I had helped build fueled a cold, calculating rage. I sat in my home office, surrounded by monitors displaying lines of encrypted data, cross-referencing server logs with legal statutes. I felt like a digital archaeologist, unearthing the fossilized remains of a corporate crime. I meticulously documented every step of my forensic analysis. I wrote scripts to automate the extraction of the PDF metadata, ensuring that my methods were reproducible and legally sound. I didn't just want to prove she forged the document. I wanted the proof to be so overwhelmingly technically precise that any defense attorney would take one look at it and advise their client to surrender. The technical aspects of the forgery were almost insultingly amateurish. When one uses Adobe Acrobat to extract a signature from an existing document, the software often leaves behind faint artifacts, a pixelated halo around the edges of the inserted image caused by the compression algorithm. A layman wouldn't notice it, but I had spent years optimizing image compression protocols for Vanguard's database storage. To my eyes, the artifacts were as glaring as a neon sign. The signature on the IP assignment agreement was a pixel-perfect match for a document I had signed 3 years ago, a standard NDA for a vendor contract. When an individual signs a document multiple times, there are natural microscopic variations in pressure, angle, and speed. A digital replica lacks these variations. By running a basic overlay analysis in Photoshop, I proved that the signature on the new agreement was an exact one duplicate of the 2023 NDA signature. I ran a pixel-level comparison, calculating the exact hexadecimal color values of the signature ink on the forged document versus the original NDA. They were identical. Statistically, even a pen from the same manufacturer will produce slight variations in ink density and color value depending on the pressure applied and the angle of the stroke. The fact that the hexadecimal values were 100% match across a sample size of 5,000 pixels was mathematical proof of duplication. I drafted a separate technical appendix detailing this pixel analysis, complete with histograms and data tables. I wanted the binder I presented to Simon Caldwell and Richard Thorne to be a weapon of mass destruction. A dense, impenetrable fortress of logic and evidence that would crush Elena's lies under its sheer weight. Elena hadn't just lied, she had committed a felony. My mind instantly shifted from engineering logic to legal frameworks. I began reading the California Penal Code, Section 470, which outlines the parameters of forgery. Every person who, with the intent to defraud, knowing that he or she has no authority to do so, signs the name of another person or of a fictitious person to any of the items listed in subdivision D is guilty of forgery. Every person who, with the intent to defraud, falsely makes, alters, forges, or counterfeits, corrupts, or falsifies any record of any will, codicil, conveyance, or other instrument, the record of which is by law evidence, or any record of any judgment of a court, or the return of any officer to any process of any court, is guilty of forgery. Every person who, with the intent to defraud, falsely makes, alters, forges, or counterfeits, corrupts, or falsifies any of the writings identified in subdivision D is guilty of forgery. The list of items in subdivision D is extensive, covering everything from checks and bonds to contracts and legal agreements. By electronically lifting my signature from a previous document and affixing it to an IP assignment contract without my consent, Elena had clearly met the statutory definition of forgery under Section 470. The legal research was exhaustive. I read through decades of case law regarding Section 470, noting how courts have consistently ruled that the intent to defraud can be inferred from the circumstances surrounding the forgery. Elena's subsequent presentation of the algorithm as company property was the definitive proof of that intent. She wasn't just altering a document. She was executing a premeditated heist. But I needed more than just a Photoshop overlay to prove my case in front of Simon Caldwell and Richard Thorne. I needed metadata. I needed the digital footprints she left behind. I dove into the metadata of the PDF document my contact had sent me. The creation date tag showed that the document was generated on November 10th at 11:42 p.m. The author tag was scrubbed, but the creator tag revealed the software used. Adobe Acrobat Pro DC, version 2023-003-220201. I cross-referenced this with the server logs I had secured via my Deadman switch. On November 10th at 11:38 p.m., Elena's credentials were used to access the centralized HR server where old vendor contracts were stored. At 11:41 p.m., the 2023 NDA containing my signature was downloaded to her local machine. At 11:44 p.m., a new document, the forged IP assignment agreement, was uploaded to my HR file. The chronological sequence was a damning, undeniable narrative of digital theft and fraud. To fully grasp the severity of this crime, I spent hours analyzing the exact precedents surrounding Section 470 in corporate contexts. The law is explicitly designed to prevent exactly this kind of exploitation. The statute reads, in excruciating detail, that the intent to defraud is the crux of the matter. Elena did not merely alter a document for administrative convenience. She altered it with the specific, undeniable intent to deprive me of intellectual property worth millions of dollars, and to enrich herself and the corporation by presenting it as a company asset. Furthermore, the legal concept of void ab initio is not merely a theoretical construct. It is a foundational pillar of contract law. When a contract is void ab initio, the courts treat it as a nullity. It is as if the document was never printed, never signed, and never filed. This means that Vanguard Analytics had zero claim, not even a disputed claim, to the Oracle protocol. If they attempted to commercialize it based on this forged document, they would be engaging in willful copyright infringement, exposing the company to statutory damages up to $150, per act of infringement under 17 U.S.C. Section 504C, plus potential criminal penalties for willful infringement under 17 U.S.C. Section 506. Elena's entire claim to my Oracle protocol rested on a document that was legally dead on arrival. The Oracle protocol was not just a side project. It was my masterpiece. It relied on a multi-layered recurrent neural network, RNN, integrated with real-time global sentiment analysis to predict supply chain bottlenecks before they happened. The architecture utilized long short-term memory, LSTM, nodes to remember historical disruptions, cross-referencing them with current geopolitical events, weather patterns, and even localized labor strike data. To give Vanguard Analytics an edge in the market, this algorithm was worth tens of millions. but it was mine. Under the United States Copyright Act, specifically 17 U.S.C. Section 106, I possess the exclusive rights to my creation. Subject to Sections 107 through 122, the owner of copyright under this title has the exclusive rights to do and to authorize any of the following. 1. To reproduce the copyrighted work in copies or phonorecords. 2. To prepare derivative works based upon the copyrighted work. 3. To distribute copies or phonorecords of the copyrighted work to the public by sale or other transfer of ownership, or by rental, lease, or lending. 4. In the case of literary, musical, dramatic, and choreographic works, pantomimes and motion pictures and other audiovisual works, to perform the copyrighted work publicly. 5. In the case of literary, musical, dramatic, and choreographic works, pantomimes, and pictorial, graphic, or sculptural works, including the individual images of a motion picture or other audiovisual work, to display the copyrighted work publicly. And 6. In the case of sound recordings, to perform the copyrighted work publicly by means of a digital audio transmission. Because I had written the code entirely on my own time and equipment, it was not a work made for hire, under 17 U.S.C. Section 101. The statute defines a work made for hire as a work prepared by an employee within the scope of his or her employment. Developing cutting-edge neural networks for predictive supply chain modeling was nowhere in my job description as a systems architect. My role was maintaining the company's internal servers and database infrastructure. The Oracle protocol was developed outside the scope of my employment, outside of company hours, and without company resources. Therefore, under 17 U.S.C. 201A, copyright vests initially in the author or authors of the work. I was the sole author. I held all exclusive rights under Section 106. Any unauthorized reproduction, derivative work, or distribution by Vanguard Analytics would constitute a direct violation of federal copyright law. The forged contract was Elena's desperate, illegal attempt to bypass Section 101 and retroactively reclassify the Oracle protocol as company property by fabricating a contractual assignment of rights. It was a clumsy, desperate move by someone who understood office politics but was entirely ignorant of digital forensics and intellectual property law. I spent the next 3 days assembling my arsenal. I printed out the Photoshop overlay analyses, the metadata extraction reports, and the server log timelines. I compiled a detailed legal brief citing California Penal Code, Section 470 and 17 U.S.C. Section 106. I placed everything in a sleek black leather binder. As I compiled the binder, I felt a strange sense of detachment. The emotional shock of the public firing had faded, replaced by the clinical precision of a system architect debugging a critical failure. The system, Vanguard Analytics, had experienced a severe error due to a malicious rogue process named Elena Rostova. My job was to identify the process, isolate the corrupted files, and terminate it permanently. I knew Elena's schedule. I knew that on Friday morning, she was scheduled to present the Oracle protocol to Simon Caldwell and Richard Thorne in the executive boardroom on the 40th floor. She was going to pitch my algorithm as her department's triumph, securing her promotion to Chief Operating Officer and guaranteeing Richard Thorne's continued investment in the firm. She needed a technical demonstration, but since I had wiped the active servers and locked the source code behind a 256-bit AES encryption before I left, she only had a mock-up GUI and a pre-recorded video of my initial demo. It would be enough to impress the non-technical executives, but it wouldn't withstand scrutiny. I wasn't just going to get my job back. I was going to destroy her career and reshape my entire standing at Vanguard Analytics. I put on my best charcoal suit, the one I usually reserve for weddings and funerals. Today, it was for a funeral. Elena's professional funeral. Security at Vanguard Analytics was robust, but it relied heavily on automated access control systems. Systems I had designed. The RFID badge they had confiscated from me was deactivated in the central database, but the physical turnstiles on the ground floor had a localized fail-safe cache for executive badges in case of a network outage. I hadn't returned my actual badge. I had handed them a cloned dummy card. My real badge, coded with emergency administrative privileges, was still in my pocket. I swiped the card. The light flashed green and the turnstile clicked open. I rode the elevator to the 40th floor, my heart beating with a steady calculated rhythm. I wasn't nervous. I was executing a carefully compiled script, and all the variables were in my favor. I approached the glass-walled executive boardroom. Inside, Elena was standing at the head of the long mahogany table, gesturing animatedly at a massive digital display, showing the mock-up of the Oracle protocol. Simon Caldwell sat to her left, looking impressed, while Richard Thorne, the lead investor, a man who controlled billions in venture capital, sat at the far end, his hands steepled, watching her closely. I didn't knock. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped into the room. The conversation stopped instantly. Elena turned, her face draining of color. Simon Caldwell stood up, frowning deeply. "Donovan?" Simon said, confusion bleeding into anger. "What are you doing here? You were terminated. Security." "Cancel that thought, Simon," I said, my voice calm but projecting authority. I walked straight to the table and dropped the heavy black binder onto the polished mahogany with a resounding thud. "I apologize for the interruption, Richard, but you are about to be defrauded out of a massive investment, and as a shareholder of this company, I felt a fiduciary duty to step in." Richard Thorne raised an eyebrow, ignoring Elena's panicked attempts to speak. "Defrauded? Go on, Mr. Miller, security." Elena finally shrieked, reaching for the phone on the table. I slammed my hand down over the receiver. "Don't touch that, Elena. Not unless you want the police here to arrest you for violating California Penal Code Section 470. That made everyone freeze. I opened the binder and slid a copy of the report toward Richard and Simon. 3 days ago, Elena fired me in front of the entire floor, claiming I had violated company policy by developing an algorithm on company time, and that I had signed an IP assignment agreement surrendering my rights to it. I began, pacing slowly behind my chair. That was a lie. The algorithm, which she is currently presenting to you as Vanguard's proprietary asset, belongs entirely to me. "We have the signed agreement, Donovan," Simon interjected, though he looked uncertain as he glanced at the documents. "You have a forgery, Simon," I corrected him, pointing to the first tab in the binder. Tab A contains a forensic overlay of the signature on that IP agreement, cross-referenced with a vendor NDA I signed 3 years ago. It is a pixel-perfect 1-1 match. It was copied and pasted. Elena was shaking now. "This is absurd. He's a disgruntled ex-employee doctoring documents." "The implications of this forgery extend far beyond a simple HR violation," I said, my voice echoing slightly against the glass walls of the boardroom. "By presenting this algorithm to investors as a proprietary asset of Vanguard Analytics based on a forged document, you are committing wire fraud and securities fraud, exposing Mr. Thorne's venture capital firm to massive liabilities." Richard Thorne's eyes narrowed. The mention of his firm's liability shifted the atmosphere in the room from a corporate dispute to a high-stakes legal crisis. "Tab B," I continued, speaking over her, "contains the server access logs and metadata extracted directly from Vanguard's HR servers. It shows Elena's credentials logging in on November 10th at 11:38 p.m., downloading the 2023 NDA, and 3 minutes later, uploading the forged IP agreement from Adobe Acrobat Pro. I have the digital fingerprint of the exact machine she used. It was her office desktop." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Richard Thorne picked up the documents, his eyes scanning the technical logs. He wasn't a systems architect, but he understood audit trails. "Under California Penal Code Section 470, altering or forging a legal instrument with the intent to defraud is a felony," I stated, locking eyes with Elena, who was now trembling visibly. "Furthermore, because the contract is a forgery, it is void ab initio. It has no legal standing. That means Vanguard Analytics does not own the Oracle protocol. Under 17 U.S.C. Section 106, I am the sole copyright holder. If you attempt to use, distribute, or profit from my algorithm, I will sue this company for copyright infringement. And I will win." Simon Caldwell looked like he had been struck by lightning. He turned slowly to Elena. "Elena, is this true? Did you forge his signature?" I was protecting the company's interests," she stammered, her polished facade completely shattered. "He built it while working here. It belongs to us." "It belongs to me," I said coldly. "And you just confessed to a felony in front of the CEO and the lead investor." Richard Thorne leaned back in his chair, a grim smile playing on his lips. He looked at Elena, then at me. "Mr. Miller, It seems you have a very strong grasp of both your intellectual property rights and our internal security vulnerabilities. What exactly is your proposal here? Because if you intended to just walk away with the algorithm, you wouldn't have brought a binder to this meeting. I nodded respectfully to Thorne. You're right, Richard. I know the value of the Oracle protocol. I know it can increase Vanguard's revenue by 30% over the next 2 fiscal years. But I am not handing it over to a company that employs thieves. I turned back to Simon. Here are my terms. First, Elena Rostova is terminated immediately for cause, and you will file a formal police report regarding the forgery. If you attempt to sweep this under the rug, I will take these logs to the authorities myself. Elena gasped, covering her mouth with her hands, but Simon didn't even look at her. He was doing the math in his head. Second, I continued, the forged IP agreement is formally nullified in writing by Vanguard's legal counsel. Third, Vanguard will license the Oracle protocol from me for an exclusive 5-year term. The licensing fee will be $2 million annually, payable in quarterly installments, with a non-refundable upfront payment of $500,000 upon execution of the licensing agreement. Additionally, I retain the right to audit Vanguard's utilization of the software to ensure compliance with the licensing terms. Simon swallowed hard. That's a steep price, Donovan. It's a bargain, Richard Thorne interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The algorithm is brilliant, Simon. I've seen the underlying logic in the preliminary reports. If he takes this to our competitors, they'll bury us. Pay the man. Thorne turned to me, his eyes gleaming with respect. And what about your employment status, Mr. Miller? I'm not interested in returning to my old desk, I said, straightening my tie. If I'm licensing my proprietary software to Vanguard, I need to ensure it's integrated correctly. I want the position of Chief Technology Officer. I report directly to you, Simon, and I have full autonomy over the engineering division. Simon looked at the broken, weeping director of client strategy, then at the undeniable proof of her crimes, and finally at me, the man who had just outmaneuvered them all. Agreed, Simon said quietly. Elena, pack your things. You're done here. I watched as she stumbled out of the boardroom, her career entirely dismantled by the very data she had failed to respect. I didn't feel triumph. I only felt the cold, satisfying click of logic falling into place. I sat down at the table, opening a fresh file folder. Now then, gentlemen, I said, the hum of the 60 Hz fluorescent lights fading into the background. Let's discuss the integration timeline for the Oracle protocol. The aftermath of the Boardroom showdown was swift and brutal. Elena Rostova was escorted from the building by the same security guards she had unleashed on me just days prior. She was carrying a small cardboard box, her face pale and drawn. I watched from the glass walls of the boardroom as she stepped into the elevator, her career at Vanguard obliterated in less than 20 minutes. Simon Caldwell moved quickly to formalize our new arrangement. The legal department, terrified of the liability I had exposed, drafted the licensing agreement exactly to my specifications. The $2 million annual fee was approved without a counteroffer. The promotion to Chief Technology Officer was announced company-wide by 5 p.m. that same day. But the true victory was not financial. The true victory was architectural. As CTO, I immediately initiated a massive overhaul of the company's internal security protocols. I implemented immutable blockchain-based audit trails for all critical HR and legal documents, ensuring that a forgery like Elena's could never happen again. I restructured the engineering department, dismantling the toxic hierarchy the MBAs had established and empowering the developers to innovate without fear of intellectual property theft. The Oracle protocol was integrated into Vanguard's main systems over the next 6 months. It performed exactly as I had designed it to. When a shipping bottleneck occurred in the Suez Canal, the protocol had predicted the ripple effects 3 weeks in advance, allowing our clients to reroute supply chains and save billions in delayed manufacturing costs. Vanguard's stock price surged. Richard Thorne's investment firm saw unprecedented returns. I sat in my new corner office on the 40th floor, looking out over the city's skyline. The fluorescent lights still hummed, but they were different up here. Softer, more refined, but I still heard the 60 Hz frequency beneath the silence. It was a reminder of where I came from, of the 22 years I spent in the trenches of the server rooms. Corporate politics is often described as a game of chess, but chess is a game of perfect information, where both players can see all the pieces on the board. Corporate warfare is different. It is a game of asymmetrical information, of hidden variables, encrypted logs, and invisible digital traps. Elena Rostova thought she was playing chess. She didn't realize I had designed the board, programmed the rules, and controlled the pieces. I didn't just win the game. I rewrote the source code.